For the past 2 seasons, the Boston Celtics have had an absolute chokehold over the Eastern Conference. However, with Jason Tatum's most recent injury that could have him sidelined for a large chunk, if not the entirety of the season next year, their future plans could be changing pretty quickly. Even before the injury, the Celtics still had to contend with the fact that they were on the books for over $500 million in salaries and tax penalties next year. And no, I didn't misspeak. The Celtics will be paying out almost double of what even the most higher end teams are spending. But later on in the video, I'm going to break down how Tatum's injury might have actually helped this franchise dodge a $500,000 sized bullet. And whether or not my scenario plays out or not, there will still be decisions that have to be made in regards to their roster going into next season. So let's get right into it and dive into why these Celtics troubles could even extend into the mid-2030s, all depending on what they do during this year's off-season. Let's start off by breaking down exactly what the Celtics payroll will be looking like going into next year. Your biggest contracts are obviously coming from Jason Tatum and Jaylen Brown with $54 and $53 million respectively. Then a tier below that you have Kristaps Porzingis at $30.7, Derek White at $26.3 with a $1.7 million incentive for hitting 3-pointers. And given how the Celtics like to use him, he'll most likely hit that for the 3rd season in a row. But probably your worst contract on the books is a 35-year-old Drew Holiday, almost making his age in millions as he's owed just over $32 million next season. Below them, you've got Sam Hauser and Peyton Pritchard making around $10 million each, and a couple of guys on the minimum contract, with all of these salaries adding up to around $230 million. But that doesn't include the fact that the Celtics are also gonna probably want to re-sign Al Horford and Luke Kornet, who are both free agents after this season. And the nice little cherry on top of this awesome sundae is that it's been reported that the league is gonna expand their luxury tax penalties on July 1st that is gonna heavily punish teams that are gonna be repeat big spenders like the Celtics. So this means, for example, if they want to re-sign Al Horford for even $3 million a season, it's going to cost them an additional $25 million in taxes. And that's without even mentioning Luke Kornet. So I think it's safe to say that they will be firmly planted over the second apron for the 3rd season in a row, which is not a good thing. See, one of the big ideas behind the design of the new CBA was to cut down on teams repeatedly buying their way to championships. There's a whole other conversation on if the CBA actually accomplishes that or if it just punishes teams like the Thunder who draft really well, but that's for another video. The idea here is that if you continue to stay in the second apron, or in other words, be one of the highest spenders, your taxes continue to get higher and higher, and ultimately, this is what makes up the rest of the Celtics total that will drive the price of their season up to that $500 million mark. But that's not the only issue that comes with staying above the second apron for multiple seasons, as there are multiple other penalties that are going to severely restrict what their front office is able to do as well. During the season, they'll be restricted from things like using any version of a mid-level exception, no access to the buyout market, no sign-in trades, no combining players and picks in the same deal for a player. Basically, the team you have is the team you got no matter what. Also, speaking of draft picks, thanks to being over the second apron last year, the Celtics cannot trade their 2031 pick. They stayed above it this year, so their 2032 pick is also frozen. And if they stay above the second apron going into next year, then both of those picks I mentioned before, as well as their 2033 pick, will all fall to the bottom of the first round, no matter where the Celtics are in the standings during those respective seasons. At which point both Tatum and Jaylen Brown would be in their mid-30s, and the Celtics would most likely be looking to rebuild. Which is why I said at the beginning that the decisions that they make during this offseason will have ripple effects going all the way into the 2033 season and what the team is going to look like beyond that. But I also mentioned that with Tatum's injury likely to put their season into limbo to begin with, their plans have now likely changed, as it doesn't really make sense to try and run it back again, especially if it's going to completely obliterate your future. And that's why I said that, as unfortunate as it is, is Tatum's injury might actually work to snap some clear judgment into the new owner that recently bought the team to not get too enveloped in the honeymoon phase and do something stupid like other new owners. So assuming this, what options does Brad Stevens have at his disposal? Well, as I mentioned earlier, with Jrue Holiday's hefty contract, it'd be nice if they were able to move away from that, but really the Portland Trail Blazers are probably the only team that could take on a contract like that, considering Portland was essentially just the middleman as Holiday found his way from Milwaukee to Boston. I don't think he's going to end up there during this offseason. Also, letting a 39-year-old Al Horford walk instead of re-signing him might also be a smart decision, as at this point in his career, you're really just hoping at the start of every season that he's still going to look the same as he did last year. And if you're not really going to be competitive until at least 2026-27, the large hit you take on those taxes for his contract doesn't really seem worth it. But he's not even on their books right now, and they're still over the second apron, so honestly, your most realistic trade is probably through Kristaps Porzingis if the team is just looking to get rid of one guy instead of their entire depth. KP's health isn't always guaranteed to begin with. I mean, the Celtics have gone for the past 2 postseasons with him partially injured, and when he is there, he's not exactly contributing in the ways that you'd expect. So having that somewhat bloated contract on the books probably isn't a good idea if you're not in win now mode. But at the same time, he is still a player that's averaged 20 and 8 with 1.8 blocks over his entire career. So you should still be able to sell a franchise on a guy like that pretty easily. Ideally, you'd want a younger center in return that could either play with Tatum and Brown going forward, or if nothing less, a player that you can build up their trade stock to flip them for someone that does fit your team's vision when Tatum's back. A good player that would fit this bill could be Mark Williams. KP is a bit ahead of the Hornets' personal timeline, so that would be a sticking point in the deal. Also, Mark doesn't really fit in the 5-out style of play that the Celtics are obsessed with, but if you don't want to change that identity, he's still a good candidate for someone you could build up before shipping him out for a piece that fits this team's current identity. Getting rid of KP would put the Celtics below the second apron, alleviating some of the financial burdens as well as freeing up some of the options for roster changes that the team would be able to make throughout the year, while also ensuring that you're not sending your future picks to the bottom of the first round in years where you're going to be relying on those picks. However, I subtly mentioned earlier that the Celtics did recently just get a new owner, and the phenomenon of new owner syndrome is a very real thing. Obviously, there's Matt Ishbia going all in, and in that rush, he decided a guy with a no trade clause and no track record of actually winning basketball games was the guy to go out and get. Or the Timberwolves throwing the kitchen sink, the kitchen, and even your grandmother's cat at the Utah Jazz for Rudy Gobert when their new owners first came in. In all fairness to the T-Wolves, that trade has actually worked out really well, but even still objectively, 5 first-round picks for Rudy Gobert just doesn't sound right when you hear it. So here's hoping that stepping into a new franchise that just got booted out of the playoffs by a team that's going to retain their core and still be $8 million below the second apron next year, a year where you're probably going to be looking at your own star player in a walking boot and street clothes while also being expected to pay out another $500 million, mostly just in taxes, on top of what is now the most expensive purchase of a sports franchise in the history of time, will be enough to sober up this new owner out of the honeymoon phase so he doesn't do something he'll regret down the line.